Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're setting out to demystify a part of the world that holds over 3,000 years of profound, incredibly layered history. We are talking about Yemen. It's a place that is literally a geographic and cultural crossroads, sitting right there at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. But to really wrap our heads around what Yemen is today, we absolutely have to look at its history through the lens of its geography and, honestly, its sheer historical extremes. Together, we're going to make sense of this deeply complex, totally fascinating, and currently heartbroken nation. Okay, let's dive into this, because this right here is the fundamental paradox of Yemen. How did the richest land in antiquity become the poorest in a peninsula? Think about it. Thousands of years ago, this territory was the wealthiest region on Earth. It practically controlled the flow of luxury goods to the world's great empires. Yet today, it stands as the poorest nation in the Arabian Peninsula, gripped by intense fragmentation. How do you go from being the literal envy of the ancient world to the epicenter of a modern crisis? Well, that is exactly the story we're unraveling today.
To make this dense history clear and easy to follow, we'll break it down into 5 logical eras: ancient wealth, empires and imperial divides, the era of two Yemens, unification, and finally, the modern humanitarian crisis.
Starting right off with Section 1, Ancient Wealth, Arabia Felix. Let's set the stage in a time when Yemen, quite literally, controlled the wealth of the ancient world.
You know, the ancient Greeks and Romans actually referred to this region as Arabia Felix, which translates to happy or fertile Arabia, and it makes sense. Unlike the massive, arid deserts to the north, Yemen's mountainous highlands caught the monsoon rains, making the land incredibly lush. Powerful ancient civilizations, most notably the Sabaean and Himyarite kingdoms, thrived here. But here's the thing, their wealth didn't just come from farming. They totally dominated the famous incense route. They harvested and exported frankincense and myrrh. Back then, these were absolute luxuries, heavily demanded by temples and palaces all across the Mediterranean, Egypt, and India. Yemen was essentially the ultimate ancient trading hub.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that number jumping right out at us, 4,500. That is the length, in meters, of the ancient Marib Dam built by the Sabaean civilization. We are talking about nearly 3 miles of infrastructure, standing 15 meters high, plopped right in the middle of a desert oasis. This engineering marvel was a game-changer. It captured flash floods and irrigated massive agricultural basins, which sustained a wealthy society exporting spices, ivory, and gold. And when this dam eventually failed centuries later, it triggered one of the greatest economic collapses in ancient history, shifting global trade routes forever.
But, of course, the very geography that brought Yemen such immense wealth eventually made it a prime target for foreign empires. This brings us to Section 2, Empires and Imperial Divides, which is really when the fracture lines of the modern nation were permanently drawn.
As global trade shifted away from land and towards the seas, foreign powers definitely wanted control. In the north, you had the Ottoman Empire trying to assert its influence, though true power often remained with the traditional Zaydi imamate. This was a deeply conservative, religiously based leadership tucked away in the isolated, rugged highlands. Now, in stark contrast, the south was colonized by the British, starting in 1839. Why? Well, they desperately needed a coaling station at the port of Aden for their steamships heading to India. So the British developed Aden into this bustling, cosmopolitan port while ruling the rural hinterlands indirectly through local sultans. This imperial division permanently altered the trajectories of the north and the south.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 3, 2 Yemens, north and south. We're going to see how this imperial division evolves straight into the ideological battleground of the Cold War.
By the late 1960s, these two distinct spheres had evolved into 2 fully rival republics. Up in the north, military officers overthrew the ancient Zaydi imamate in 1962, creating the Yemen Arab Republic. This state was basically a coalition of military and powerful tribal leaders, largely supported by conservative Arab states. Meanwhile, the British withdrew from the south in 1967, and what emerged there? The People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, a state driven completely by Marxist ideology and aligned directly with the Soviet Union. The South systematically dismantled traditional tribalism and feudalism. So just think about that setup. Right next door to each other, you had a traditional, tribal, capitalist North and a radical, Soviet-backed Marxist South, which sets up our next era perfectly. Section 4, Unification and its Fractures. With the collapse of the Soviet Union looming, these two radically different systems attempted a really hopeful but ultimately flawed unification.
On May 22, 1990, the Republic of Yemen was officially declared. People were literally celebrating in the streets, hoping for a final end to the divisions. But notice this one incredibly revealing detail. 45 days after the unified state was declared, they still hadn't agreed on a constitution. It was a merger largely driven by economic desperation in the south and political opportunism in the north, rather than any sort of carefully integrated plan. I mean, they were trying to fuse a highly centralized Marxist system with a tribal military system pretty much overnight.
And this brilliantly illustrates the economic disaster that immediately struck the newly unified nation. They were expecting unity to bring shared oil revenues, a unified power grid, and a booming economy. Instead, geopolitical stances taken during the Gulf War led to catastrophic unexpected costs. Gulf states suspended their aid, immediately costing Yemen $2 billion in lost revenues. Trade embargoes were slapped on them. Hundreds of thousands of Yemeni workers were expelled from neighboring countries. And just like that, the new nation was saddled with $1.2 billion in annual debt obligations. The whole mirage of unity just buckled under the weight of a collapsed economy and soaring inflation.
That failure to integrate those two systems, compounded by intense economic hardship and deep, unresolved historical grievances, eventually ignited a devastating conflict. This brings us to Section 5, the modern humanitarian crisis.
To understand how the current conflict unfolded, let's walk through this timeline. In 2011, inspired by the Arab Spring, massive protests erupted demanding the removal of President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had ruled the north since 1978. In 2012, under immense pressure, Saleh finally stepped down, transferring power to his deputy, Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi. However, that transition was incredibly rocky. By 2014, an armed movement from the northern highlands known as the Houthis, who are rooted in the Zaydi Shia tradition, swept down and actually seized the capital city of Sana'a. As the Houthis pushed further south, in 2015, President Hadi fled, and a Saudi-led military coalition launched a massive air campaign to restore his government.
So, the crucial point is the result of what has become a brutal, multi-factional deadlock. Neither side has been able to secure a decisive military victory, leading to a protracted and grinding stalemate. Just look at these impacts. Public services and state infrastructure have been absolutely devastated. Millions of people have been displaced from their homes. A severe economic blockade has restricted the flow of basic survival goods, and state authority is entirely fragmented among competing local, regional, and international actors. The sheer scale of human suffering here is exactly what makes this the world's most severe modern humanitarian crisis.
Yet even amid all this modern destruction, the physical landscape of Yemen still tells its ancient story. Yemen possesses this unparalleled architectural heritage. From the ancient stone monuments of Marib, to the towering mud-brick skyscrapers of Shabam, and the breathtaking old city of Sana'a. These structures were built by generations of Yemenis using the very earth and stone of their own geography. It is a really profound, honestly tragic contrast, seeing the resilience and beauty of a unique 3,000-year-old civilization standing directly amidst the tragedy of modern fragmentation and war.
Our sources frequently refer to the situation in Yemen with just 3 heavy words: the forgotten war. And you really have to wonder, how is it that the most historic crossroads in the world, a land that once literally supplied the empires of antiquity, a region that remains so incredibly vital to global maritime trade today, somehow became an overlooked crisis? It's a huge question, one that demands our attention and challenges us to look closer at a nation that is so much more than just the daily headlines. I hope this explainer has given you the solid foundation to truly understand Yemen's history and leaves you eager to learn even more.